And now our conversation with Adrienne Marsh of Altum Insight. Adrienne, I'm so glad that you're here with us. I understand that you did work, Altum Insight did work, you did work for the Barack Obama campaign of 2008, the first one, and the reelection campaign of Claire McCaskill in 2012. And I'm just fascinated, especially with Barack's 2008 campaign, which is a very famous political campaign in terms of its success. What was your role in each of these campaigns?
So I've been doing campaign politics for about 25 years, and I got my start in Michigan doing a myriad of things there. Went to the Hill for a bit. I eventually left to go in 2006 to work for Claire McCaskill in Missouri when she was state auditor. I pulled off an upset there. And then I went with her to the Senate, and we do some things sometimes where you can go out on loan to campaign. So I got the chance to go to Florida for the Obama campaign and help out with the communications operation there. We had a 35-person communications team, which is unheard of how large it is, but it's reflective of the state and how complicated that was. It was one of the last years that we were able to pull off the kind of victory we did in such a tough state, which is now fully relinquished to the right. But at the time, it was a real study in the United States. Florida can be so reflective of the United States at times, and we learned so much about how to organize well, how to communicate well, how to spread out your message to really focus on different constituencies and speak to the things that matter to each of those communities. And we ended up pulling off quite the victory in Florida that year, as we did across the country with the Obama campaign. I don't even know that we expected for it to be as successful as it was, but it was certainly rewarding, to say the least, to be part of that campaign. And of course, see him reelected again in 2012. I didn't get to work on that campaign because I was back with Claire, as you know, but that was certainly a historic thing to be part of.
It's fascinating because when you look at presidential elections, that was the last election, 2008, that really wasn't close. I believe it was like 54 to 46. It was not close. And we've had elections that were not close, but every one since then has been super close. Was there anything from that original 2008 campaign that if you were advising a Democratic presidential candidate in 2024, is there one piece of magic from that Obama campaign that you would advise a 2028 campaign to do?
I would tell them to find a unicorn. And I know that sounds funny because there's so much about the 2008 election. I think we can certainly learn some lessons from and apply now, structurally, operationally. But there's so much about Barack Obama as a candidate, um, he's just such a unique figure at a specific place in time where we needed that symbolic hope of change and positivity. It's really the best of what America has to offer at a time when we needed it the most. And he embodied so much of what we have in terms of potential as Americans collectively. It's not just about what he represented as a historic advancement in so many different ways, but he was also just this culmination of our spirit in all that we want to be as Americans. And to have a person who represents that, I think it was very special. So I say that it's a unicorn because he's just so unbelievably magical. You could just shout into the ether that we were having a rally and hundreds of thousands of people would show up. That doesn't happen in a normal political campaign. You have to call and call and call and call and call. And then maybe 30% of the people you called show up. We had to turn people away sometimes. I mean, obviously that was not the goal, but it was just such a magical moment in time.
He was the last presidential candidate rock star. I mean, people just they you wanted to be at the event. Bill Clinton was a lot like that too. You just sort of wanted to be in. He wasn't aura farming on purpose. People just wanted to be around him. I think that showed. Were there any lessons from the 2008 campaign that you applied to Claire McCaskill's 2012 campaign, the reelection campaign?
I think there were lessons from a structural place about how to operationalize your campaign. And this is going to sound a little bit boring, but it was about accountability that went all the way from the top to the bottom, including the volunteers. That was something that we hadn't really seen before. This idea that you could empower a volunteer to somehow, it just made it empowered volunteers to to maximize the potential of the energy of the campaign, it allowed us to get so much more done because staff could be doing other things while volunteers were acting as staff. It certainly did maximize the energy and the effort of what we had going there. I think the other thing that it showed us, maybe not for the first time, but in a big way, the power of authenticity, the power of political courage, the power of going out there and being a spokesperson for the campaign. Even if you weren't officially ordained as such, the messaging was so clear and so disciplined that there was really no risk of going off script because everyone felt like they were singing from the same hymnal. And that may have been the magic of that campaign and that candidate and that moment, but it showed us that if we are organized and we believe in the same thing and we are all kind of marching in step together, just the power of what that can do. And I don't know that we've had the same ability or maybe the same agreement in the same way since then. But I think that we are coming to that moment where there's a lot of coalescing around, wow, this I are we at rock bottom? Because I don't know where else we go from here, but this could be the moment where we look past any differences we have within the party to say, "We gotta get it together." This is what happens when we don't. There's just too much at risk, there's too much to lose. If we're gonna make something of this moment, we have to come back to those lessons from 2008 and other campaigns.
Can ask you questions about those campaigns and any others all day. I'm a presidential history junkie. I promise you, when I was 4 years old, I memorized all the presidents in order and can recite them in under a minute. I've read all the biographies. I'm just fascinated with the presidency. However, you parlayed that experience into what you're doing as CEO now of Altum Insight, and it's on purpose that it's insight and not insights. You take research that your team does, and you help candidates and campaigns translate that into a narrative that can work for their campaign. Can you tell me just a little bit about Altum Insight, when you founded it, why you decided to found it, and what the organization is all about?
Much of the work that I've done on the ground and even as a consultant has been about work in the rural and red space, places like Michigan and Missouri and Colorado, Florida. They have parts of each of these states have there are significantly rural and significantly conservative spaces. Being that I'm from a small town, which is not unfamiliar to you, uh, you know, people talk a little different there, and the way that they care for each other is a little bit different there. The expectations they have of one another and public officials is a little different in those places. And I know that's cliche. People say that anywhere you are, but that is really truly the case in some of these parts of the country. I have a fascination and a real love for those places just because it's where I'm from and I care so much about these communities. It's just a very special place to be from a rural part. And I found years ago that it felt like these places that, Indiana, Arkansas were a couple of places that we were working on at the time. We were trying to apply a different kind of social psychology to the messaging in ad making to see if we could make a difference, see if we could move margins somehow. The good news is we were able to move margins. The bad news is we learned that we're never going to outpace the rate of loss happening in some of these places. And the Democratic Party is going to continue to narrow the map against us, the more we don't take that seriously. We're going to choke off states that we could be competitive in because we don't have the trust of those rural voters. And we have nothing to say to them that's going to change that. Because frankly, we're not asking them why. And after some head scratching, a friend introduced me to one of our business partners. So Kate Monson at our firm introduced us to Frank Spring, who is someone who studied the neuroscience, the brain science of storytelling and how it affects the brain, and then worked closely with an ethnographer, a corporate marketing ethnographer, to see if there was an approach to research that would allow us to change voter behavior, understand the stories that voters are telling themselves so that we can understand where we fit into that story, whether we're a villain or otherwise, and figure out, can we change that story? Can we figure out how to open up connections that might not have existed otherwise by asking them questions? And that's essentially what we do at Ultim Insight. Ultim is just Latin for deep. It just means going deep, means having really provocative, um, conversations that ask people so much about their lives. And what we do for primarily in the full arc of our research is that we spend several days with people. So this is essentially what amounts to an adapted corporate market research method where you spend several days, if not longer, with a group of people, in this case, a segment of the electorate, and you ask them questions about their life that are anything from very broad questions about their values and how they choose to live their lives to more specific questions. Eventually, it evolves into a place where it likely navigates into politics. And after the 4 days, they believe that they have gotten you there. It's an organic evolution that doesn't feel leading or probing. It really feels like a organic evolving conversation that moved in that direction. But it allows us to understand the real motivations. And I liken it a little bit. I tell the story frequently, and you can kind of see over here that there's some Detroit Lions stuff happening there. That's if somebody had come to me and said, I'm going to talk to you today about why you should become a Chiefs fan. And I would say, there's absolutely no way you're going to make me a Chiefs fan. That's just not going to happen. I'm going to literally put on my jersey and tell you about why Dan Campbell is the best coach ever to live. And of course, you would never make any headway. But if you came to me and said, "Hey, where are you from? What did you do as a kid? How you spend your time? What are your best memories?" The time you learn I'm a Lions fan, the things you know about why I'm a Lions fan suddenly open up the corridor for you to talk to me about why I might change my opinion about another team. Now, am I going to become a Chiefs fan that day? Probably not. But I would be open to having a conversation about it very differently. And that's kind of what we're hoping happens with this kind of research. It's the missing first step in having a dialogue with people that may change their opinion about what they believe are assumptions about the Democratic Party that may or may not be true, but we're going to find out what we can do about it and how we can connect differently.
I understand that Ultim Insight has come upon some research, the evidence of what you've gathered that indicates that there is a real hot topic that candidates might not be thinking about midterms or in 2020, and it has to do with AI. What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we sometimes we do these studies where we just want to go look at a segment of voters to find out what's going on with these people. We can't seem to crack the code there. Let's have a chat with them and just have them tell us what they're thinking about. It can be as specific as we did a study in Montana that specifically asked people, what do you think about the paradigms of democracy? And then we would study that. This case, it was just an open call. What's on your mind? We expected to hear a lot about the economy, the cost of living discussions that were a big topic coming out of the last election cycle, the sort of the Virginia races and some of those gubernatorial races. That was the story that we were hearing, is that cost of living was huge. That was going to be the story of the entire election cycle. And what Democrats tend to do is, if a little bit is good, a lot must be better. And so you could tell that we were fixing to talk about the economy from here until the end of the sunset. Well, our thought was, why don't we ask and find out? We expected to hear a lot about that. That's not what we got at all. What we got was an off the charts reaction about AI. It very quickly, and maybe not so quickly, but quickly registered with particularly rural voters AI and why it's invasive, why they feel like they can't trust it, and more so than anything, why they think it's undermining the potential life experiences of their children. It could be undermining their values, uh, their their potential, their economic potential, their career potential, just the values of small towns altogether. These are all concerns that people were having heavily around the issue of AI. It's a big trust issue. And we saw that as not only a fascinating takeaway that people cared so much and were so concerned about AI, but what our head researcher, Frank Spring, saw was that this also could be the first crack in the wall, the red wall. And that being that so many Republicans have gone all in with many of the companies, these AI companies, crypto companies, tech companies. They're all in with that stuff. And we're finding that that could be the seeds trust that are fueling there. They're not listening to where much of their base is living. Does that give us an opening to say, well, we are the consumer protection people? We are the people who are watching out for the little guy. And we're definitely concerned about this as well. If we're championing the consumer protection policies that we've been known for, And we're pointing out that they're all about reaping the benefits of, corporate runaways. And I'm not trying to use hyperbole there, but that you get what I'm saying. If we can show that dichotomy, then there could be an opening for a conversation to say, we're not what you think we are. And they're probably worse than you've been giving them credit for. And does that give us an opening to create a bit of a wedge opportunity to be able to do something around AI in some of these communities? It may not be the end all be all of how we get back, but it could be the opening to a crack in the door that eventually opens us and invites us in. And we should not take that lightly.
Now, a candidate who might watch this podcast, for example, might listen to you and they might be like, great idea. I'm going to run with that. Is it that simple, or does the research? Can you tell me about how you would advise, to whatever extent you can, how a candidate would implement this?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we should be looking at campaign strategy altogether is never as a one off. It can never be just a group of 30 people. It can never be just one poll. It can never be just one victory. The takeaways of doing something like that and saying that is how people feel is not the responsible way to do this. The way that this happens in a normal corporate environment is that you might start with a deep ethnography. You might learn something about trend lines within a piece of a segment of the market that said, okay, women feel this way, younger people feel this way. What do we do about that? Well, of course, that's not the end all be all either. Then, of course, you test that through quantitative surveys. You might do a focus group. You might put it into an ad and do ad testing. One of the interesting things that we've learned over time is that is the way that the corporate environment has learned to do this, where corporate marketing through photography is standard and has been for the last 20 years, something we don't do necessarily here is standard practice there, is how they create effective formulas. They spend just as much money in some cases on corporate market research as they do on marketing, whereas it can be 200 to 1 in politics, where you'll put just a fly by night ad question that tests well into an ad literally overnight and put $2 million behind it, $10 million behind it without having done proper, full, extensive research on it. And what you find is, the ethnographer we work with has spent a ton of time in the pharmaceutical industry. Well, they've come to realize, and you can't unsee this once you see the formula, when next time you see a pharmaceutical ad, you're going to see them not necessarily buying a pill. You're going to see a story about buying empowerment. Someone is shown what their ailments are, and this limits you from time with your grandkids or doing the activities that you like to do or achieving your potential. And then they show you the chance that you can change that. So you use this moment in time to change your life. And then the rest of the commercial shows you what you've done to be your own hero. Now you get to be with your grandkids. You can jump on a trampoline. You can, be in the Olympics. You can do whatever you want because you chose that moment. They're not selling you a pill, they're selling you a choice. And that's because they've studied that. They work with those people to understand what is the story you're telling yourself and how do we get to be part of it. The same thing needs to be happening here, but it means constantly interfacing with voters, constantly interfacing with strategy, testing, 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 testing. We're still acting like we're a corner store campaign that's making buttons and going out in the last 30 days of a campaign when this is no longer what we're doing. We spend as much on advertising with both Republicans and Democrats in an election cycle as major industries spend on their marketing for major products. That's pharmaceuticals, that's food and beverage, that's any number of things. We need to be taking this as seriously, our ability to market to voters, to our consumers in the same way. They're making a critical choice. This isn't about buying toothpaste. This is about the choices that they're going to make that change the policies that affect their lives. We have to honor that by giving it the credit it deserves, by making a real sound case, not just some fly by night scary ad about what people need to be afraid of. But that's the other side of it, is that there's an unintended consequence with the way that we do our marketing in this industry that ends up in a downward spiral on both sides, where we're gonna end up all kind of being on the underbelly of the failure of our ability to make a positive case to people about what's at stake. Instead, it's a firing squad, and everybody's gonna end up on the floor.
You can't go ready, fire, aim. That's what this, I mean, this is serious serious qualitative, quantitative marketing. It's deep. You've got an ethnographer. This study was done in rural Nebraska. Are there any candidates who are going to step up and use the research?
Yeah, we're currently the reason why we do that research the way we do it is so that we can share it, so that we're able to give it to as many people as possible. So not only is it going to candidates, but it's going to organizations that are helping candidates, which is the independent expenditures and the political action committees that often go in with some big money and layer in that messaging. There's the the side of advertising in politics that I was just referring to. It's both about going deep and scary in some ways, and it's also about not necessarily using our resources as efficiently as we should. Does that bear because of ethnography? I don't know. But I think that when we understand and get a real sense of the weight of the responsibility we have and how we communicate with voters, some of the stuff will organically shift because the expectations of voters is that we're better. They're sending us signals. A Pew Research study from 2024 showed us that 22% of Americans trust Congress. That's abysmal. That's like you can't trip over how low the standards are to achieve something higher than that. And I think the issue is because we know that negative works. We know that when we attack them, it sticks. And it's that old, I don't know who first came up with it, but it takes five positive things to say to someone to undo one negative thing. The same is true in ads. We know that negative ads work. And so oftentimes at the end, we use that. We use negative ads on each other, so it's a path of mutual destruction. So in the end, that's how you end up with 22% trust is that we don't give them any reason to trust us because basically it's always going to be a choice of the lesser of two evils. They're terrible, we're terrible. See, look at all the ways that we've talked about how terrible we are. Why would you trust anything about American politics? We not only need to make a better case and do better by saying this is what we're going to do for you, to be able to build back that trust, we need to start earlier in the election cycle because uh, because we've eroded brand along with it. So now you could be Jesus Christ himself running in Indiana, and you are not going to get elected if you've got a D behind your name because the party is also weighted by that path of mutual destruction. And that's not just us, it's them too. The issue is that by taking the resources separately and being able to say collectively within one of the parties, both of the parties, how do we shift some of those resources to make a better case about the difference in the choices in terms of party? This is not just about one-off candidates, but this is about what do you do when you caucus together? What do you do when you make a choice about majorities? This is now we're running national campaigns, whether we like to admit it or not. We have some responsibility to make a case around those things. And we're not doing a very good job because it's just about winning today and the last 4 weeks and this election cycle. Neither party is looking necessarily very well 2, 4, 6, 10 years down the line. How are we going to make a case about where the country wants to go so they can make a real choice?
There is a famous quote by a very famous Oklahoman, Will Rogers, who said, it's something about his political party being organized. He goes, "What do you mean? I'm a Democrat." So I don't know how the market for research works. Is this report going to be publicly available? Can I, in the description, point them to it so folks can read it?
Absolutely. It's available at altum-insight.com. And there's that study as well as a handful of other studies. And of course, we're excited to do more this year. I think there's all kinds of things that we'd like to test, but we're finding the most fascinating research just goes into finding segments of voters and asking them, what is top of mind for you? What's the most important thing going on? And finding out what that is so that we can be learning along the way that these we cannot make assumptions. We can't just look at the snapshot of public opinion today and say this is how we design the study for the next year. These things are constantly shifting and asking people not only what's top of mind, but why. What do you perceive us to be as part of that problem or solution? And what do we do about it together? How do we be part of that with you? There's an interesting part of the way that we put our research together that's based on this psychological methodology called the stairway model of behavioral change, and it begins with active listening, and from there it goes on to establishing rapport and to creating empathy, and then to exerting influence, and then of course behavioral change. And what we find is that currently on both sides again, when it comes to the engagement, we often start at exerting influence. We'll say, vote for me because I'm going to lower your taxes. And then we expect people to go to the polls and vote for us. But they also know that I'm a Democrat. Do I have any credibility around that for them? Do they trust me? Or is there something else that's a bigger issue for them? I haven't bothered to listen to them to know that. So will they give me their vote? I'm expecting them to because I told them to. But I haven't earned any ability to be able to leverage that for any reason. So the idea is that by starting out with active listening, we can find out what's important to people, find out where we fit into that narrative, and then evolve that with them. I talk back at you. Is this what you're hearing? Because this is what we're hearing is important to you. We care about that too. This is what we understand that you want about it. And this is what we do. You earn trust in that process. By the time you ask them again to have their support for what you're doing, they have a little bit better idea that you're going to do what you say you're going to do because you obviously heard them. That's an important part of how we build back trust with voters across the board. But certainly in some of these rural places, like you're talking about in Nebraska and otherwise, where we're finding out we don't really have a lot of credibility at all.
You think that that sentiment is maybe just part of the Midwest, or if you went to rural California, and California's got a rural part. I mean, do you think that it would translate to other different rural areas of states?
I do. And here's why. In that study, what we learned was not just about how AI was this scary, terrible thing that's going to undermine, you know, Midwestern small town values. We learned that there is a pride about people being from small towns that is electric. People are excited about where they live. They believe it's very special. Obviously, I relate to that quite a bit. They support one another. I used to tell my mom used to tell me that you better be careful what you do in high school because I'll find out about it before you get home. And that's because, not sound to be scary, that's because your neighbors care about you. And they know that if you're doing something in trouble, that telling your mom about it is the way to keep you safe. They take it very seriously to care for people as a community. I mean, that saying, it takes a village, that's in villages and communities and small towns everywhere. What we found is that that pride is contrasted against a perception about urbanicity, about communities that are not necessarily urban, but are not rural. And if you're not rural, then you're not as good. And that's a little bit of a hard thing to hear. It's not to say you're bad, you're just not as good as it is to be from rural because we are here for a reason and we love it. And if you're not from here, you don't get it. The problem is that they see the Democratic Party as an urban party. They don't see us as a rural party. And so therein lies the trust friction is that they don't necessarily see us as them, as people who can relate to them, who advocate for them, and can appreciate that way of life. Until we do something to change that, I don't care if you're from upstate New York or Ocala, Florida, or anywhere in between. You're not. We're not going to have a great case to make there because the perception is we just don't get it.
Is there any risk at all in alienating the urbanicity, as you noted, or is the assumption that the urbanicity, the base, will always come along with Democrats?
That's hard to tell without an additional study, which is something we're hoping to put together still in this coming year. My perception, being both a Democrat and being from a small town, is that the Democratic Party that was the Democratic Party when I was coming up through this was that it was the party of working people, that it was a gritty party that had space for everybody. I think there was a perception that there was an urban element to it, and it was because it wanted good things for all people, all people. And that wasn't a bad thing. That was like well, there are working people everywhere. And so everybody needs a fighter like that. That's what I was taught. I mean, I was from an automotive household. So, like, we've had a lot of shop influence at our house. So I think the problem is that we've lost a bit of that. It's gone to the part of that urban perception that's we talk down to you and we know better than you and we're smarter than you. We know what's best for you. So you clearly don't know enough about what you need. We're going to go talk at you about it. Well, no, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be tronized. You don't know, especially if the idea is that you not only don't know what you're talking about, but you have no idea to how to relate to where I'm from. You don't come here and get to know me or where I'm at until we start really getting in there with people again and get that grit back. Again, I just don't know that we've got a case to make. there is a gritty side to what we do. But I was talking to someone else not that long ago about this perception that the people you see talking for our party are all about that energy and that fight on the left that we definitely need. It's definitely the excitement and the motivation that we need to keep our spirits up and keep going. But we often don't have speakers from within our party that show that we are a spectrum of people, and we not only go out, but we go up and down and everywhere in between. We've got to be able to cultivate those voices in our party that are not just about who's running for president next or who's really great in a hearing in Congress. And if they're running for governor next time, we need to be finding everyday people who are saying, hey, this matters. And this party is actually closer to a lot of the stuff we care about than you might think. I mean, I say that as a pretty devout Christian. I'm a Democrat because I'm a Christian. And I think it aligns with my values very deeply. And when I talk to people who are Republicans or conservatives about those things, it's like that Lions Chiefs thing. It might not win them over, but it certainly is opening a door to say, huh, well, that's interesting because the stuff that I really vilified about the Party before, you can back up with scripture. Well, that's a conversation I'm willing to have. Yeah. Well, we should have I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm saying we have more in common than you want to believe. So give us a chance.
I'll give you just a quick anecdote. My grandfather was a Methodist minister, and a good friend of his was Carl Albert, McAllister, Oklahoma, back in the 60s. And Oklahoma, very much a labor state. State motto, labor conquers all, except in Latin, omnia something. But my hometown, Henrietta, Oklahoma, that's a labor town. That's a union town. Glass plant there. Labor Day is their biggest holiday. Is there any research you're doing here in Oklahoma? Because Oklahoma, as far as Democratic candidates, I think there's a shot in a couple of congressional districts this year. I think governor is going to be pretty close. But is there anything, are you doing any research here in Oklahoma?
Oklahoma's on our list, and for a number of reasons. I mean, you all had that ballot initiative on choice not that long ago that, knocked everybody's socks off. This is the same thing that's kind of happening to some degree in my beloved Missouri. I'm not from Missouri, but I tell people I spend a lot of time on an RV with Claire McCaskill there, that I'm practically one of them. But I'll tell you, I think it's interesting if you look at ballot initiatives on progressive issues, they they routinely, doesn't matter the year, doesn't matter who's on the ballot, they routinely perform at 52, 55, 60, 70%. We're talking progressive issues, minimum wage, choice, Medicaid expansion. These things do really well in these places. What matters is if you put a D behind that thing, it tanks. So, what we're trying to figure out is how do you square that with some of these communities? Where do you take these test cases where initiatives on progressive issues have done well and figure out what is it with that difference in a candidate versus an issue? Because if that candidate talks about those issues, it doesn't help. But if you talk about those issues in isolation, the sky's the limit. We've got to figure that stuff out, and in places where that dichotomy is happening, that's where we want to study those things. And again, it's about asking, what do you care about and why? But it's also about evolving into, but why is that different? Answer that question for me. We don't know the answer to that, and this research is how we find out how.
Couple of state ballots possible for the midterm. I don't know how likely it's going to be, but one would repeal medical marijuana. That would be a very unpopular move. Governor Stitt, called for it in his state of the state, and to roll back Medicaid expansion, which I think would be even more unpopular. I commented in another podcast. I said that's practically handing the governorship to Cindy Munson, a Democrat, which would be a great win for the Democrats. That would be a national story. But I'm like, it speaks to what you're talking about and the importance of issues and how people feel about them separate from party identity.
I think there are a couple things to point out about what you're saying. Um, One is about the Medicaid expansion, rolling that back. You should ask Matt Blunt, which I know is a very long ago reference. But when Republicans do things like that, they think they're hurting Democrats. They think that they're somehow, making a big stand. What they don't understand is that they're hurting many of their own people. And that's what I don't understand about just blindly supporting a party that routinely, economically hurts working people. I just don't understand why that's just carte blanche, blind support when it hurts the people the most. I'll also say that what you're talking about in terms of that consequence giving the governorship to the Democrats is is a little bit about what's happening this election cycle. I think we stand to do well this election cycle. Maybe win back the House. We might even have a shot at the Senate. Certainly tease us up for a pretty decent place for the presidential the next election cycle. The problem will be that we'll win by them punching themselves in the face. They will have done something wrong. It's not that we've done anything right. I don't know that we've done anything necessarily to show that we're making major shifts or that we're changing a lot about the way that we're earning back trust. And yet, at the same time, if we don't maximize this moment and we'll be squandering an opportunity to say, let's take a quick breath here, get our bearings, and really take a chance to recalibrate and get this right moving forward because we cannot, it's not sustainable for us. And again, this is a football reference, but it's not a winning strategy to wait for them to turn the ball over. I mean, my husband likes to say we need a turnover. That's all great. And we love it when it happens. That is not a winning strategy for the long haul. We've got to figure out a way to play smart offense. And sometimes that can be about playing smart defense, but it's got to work together.
Yeah, I think a way that I'm energized by our conversation here is that I completely agree. It would be much better for Democrats to win, not by Republicans losing, but by having a strategy that finally resonates with people. We want people, rural, urban, everywhere, to understand that Democrats care about them way more than they've ever thought. And I just don't think that they quite hear it in our message. They hear culture war politics. There's all sorts of things like that. Uh, I really appreciate your time learning about you, Adrienne, and Altum Insight. Is there anything that I failed you to ask you that you would like to throw out there?
A little bit dovetails on something you just said about it being it would be unfortunate if we just kept winning because they lost. And I'll tell you one last little anecdote. We did a study in Arizona with Gen Z Latinos, and we weren't sure exactly what to find. They were sort of trying to suss out some messaging issues. But what we found was this incredible gritty connection to a generation of specific voters that was fascinating. The assumptions I had, granted, I'm a Gen X, so my ideas about what Gen Z was were very misinformed, and understanding their insights on things was so fascinating. I'll tell you what, a group that I would have guessed based on, frankly, the fact that they were Latino, that they were young, that maybe that they were just starting out in life economically. I thought all of those reasons would give them a greater propensity to be persuaded along the Democratic line. And I was very surprised if Mitt Romney was running this election cycle. Not only would Gen Z Latinos vote for him in droves, but they would likely form a loyal bond with him politically or the Republican Party if that was who they were for a generation to come. And that's what's frightening about this for Democrats is that we're at the breaking point in so many ways with making a case about who we are and what we are. It would take so little right now to alienate segments of the population where we have really strong cases to make just simply because the perception isn't there. And if it was just slightly off over in the Republican side, we're likely losing them. And the last thing I'll say about that is that I think um, when it when it when it relates to how people make these connections and these allegiances to political parties, I think that there's so much ingrained in how these bonds are created generationally that we really need to be taking seriously. The
Yeah.
part about the Gen Z Latinos is entirely true. If Mitt Romney was running today, we would likely not be able to undo the inroads there, and that's pretty concerning for us that we're that close to losing connections with people and making a case. We don't necessarily have that opportunity on this side.
And is that because Mitt is more of a moderate Republican, or does that have to do with his ties? His father, I think, had dual citizenship in Mexico.
It had nothing to do with Latino connections, which we found to be a fascinating thing we learned about that generation uh, by and large, which is that they're young and Latino, but they put themselves as young Americans as their identity before they put themselves as Latino American. And so much about the way that they align themselves with values and issues that matter to them was based on where and how those pieces fit together. Some of what they were finding in polling was that affordable housing, for example, stood out as a big issue for Gen Z Latinos. And so they were talking to them about the way that they can afford housing. Well, it wasn't, the ads weren't doing well. So they, part of the study was to figure out, what does that necessarily mean? The interesting thing we found out was that it was so much heavier than we were giving them credit for. What it meant was that as multi-generational Latinos, they were saying so many sacrifices have been made for me up until this point, and there has been progress made generationally. This is, I feel the obligation to advance this, to carry my weight in this process. And the economy is set up for me to fail. So they're working multiple jobs, they're working gig jobs on the side. Their marker for what it means to advance and pay honor to those sacrifices before them was something like affording a home. It wasn't about where the home rent fit into their budget. It was about this idea that owning a home was a symbolic achievement that honored the sacrifices that had been made for them. That, if that's not the American dream, both as an aspiration and a weight, I don't know what is. And we're not connecting that emotionally with people. And so it sounds like we're talking at them about things that don't, it sounds like we're missing the mark. And it shows up in the way that people react to us, which is, you guys don't know what you're talking about, because we don't. We didn't ask them. And now we can.
Didn't
We
ask
didn't ask them.
and it's where it all comes. You've got, with research, you get some proof, especially when you do it at scale. Adrienne Marsh, CEO of Altum Insight. Where can people find you on social or email or however you would want them to connect with you?
I mean, LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect with me professionally. I am not that great at social media these days. As a busy mom, I'm spending most of my time, like, going to basketball games and piano lessons and things like that. But LinkedIn is a great place to find a lot of the things that we post, like reports, podcasts, uh, little updates and Substacks, just writings that we have to share. Same thing on our website, altum-insight.com. And we love to do presentations for people and them the research and go deep with them and answer all their questions. So certainly we're glad to entertain things like that as well.
I will make it a point on YouTube, if you're watching this right now, if you'll go down to the bottom of the description, I'll have all the links to everything. And if I miss one, Adrienne will send me a link and I will add it to there. If you're listening on podcast, be sure to give us a little review if you like. If you get to right now, you might as well give us a 5-star review. It helps us with the algorithm. For Adrienne, I'm Ryan. We will talk to you later.
Thank you.